as Muslims, we understand right and wrong from the Sharia. And so our economic decision making comes from the Sharia. And therefore, every economic system or ideology possesses three components as follows. So whether you're thinking as an Islamic economist or you're thinking as somebody else, you will naturally be thinking about these elements, right? Which is one is the economic system, the normative elements, which means what ought to be, how should an economy be? So even Islam has this kind of vision. How should an economy be? How should it be in terms of jobs, in terms of labor, employment, in terms of poverty, in terms of the distance between the rich and the poor, the gap between the rich and the poor, in terms of social mobility, in terms of the distribution of wealth, in terms of ownership, private ownership, public ownership. All of these discussions, Islam has a view on what it ought to be. Even conventional economics has the same, you could say, same ideas and principles. They also have answers on these things. But the question you have to ask, and we have to ask, is where do they derive these responses from? Look, there has to be where does a person ultimately seek what is right and wrong? So if you have a faith like us, we have Islam, our deen, we naturally will ultimately go to Islam to tell us what is right and wrong. If you don't have a faith, then it's very subjective. It's being influenced by your experiences, your society, social circumstances, the trend. So you can understand you end up in a very lost situation. But Islam, alhamdulillah, has given us this. It's a blessing that it's universal. It's never changed. The principle of Quran has stayed. It's there until Qiyamah. It's the place for us to understand what an economic system ought to be. And with that then comes economic analysis. This is the positive statements. And that looks at what it is actually at present. So even Islamic economics and conventional economics will have this this element whereby you look at what's happening right now. And then once you understand what's happening right now, the current dynamics of the situation, you make policy to help you move from the analysis to the system. You make policy to move from positive to normative. Right? It's a gap analysis. So you move from what is to what ought to be through these economic policies. And that is economics in a nutshell. That's what policymakers do. So if you're in the government or you're part of an economic think tank, this is your job. You're doing analysis of what is, what ought to be, and then do a gap analysis and give suggestions and ideas.